Hey, good morning or afternoon, I guess it is. Morning for some people, afternoon, evening for others. Welcome to the first layer. Brian, how are you today?
I'm actually surprisingly good after my hectic afternoon of trying to find the one part that I don't stock. So that was an interesting day.
What part don't we stock?
In this case, it was the round heat sinks that are on E3D V6 hot ends. And surprisingly, none of my friends had spares. Long story, I broke something, so I had to build a hybrid hot end. That was the one piece I was missing and that I found in a bucket yesterday. So, bonus, it's printing behind me now. Hopefully, we might have something to show you a bit later today. How about you, Richard? How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm just getting stuff ready for inventory.
Ooh.
We have thermistors in stock. These are your typical 100K thermistors. And we have heater cartridges, both 12 and 24 volt in stock. We are going to be putting them up on the website later this week. We're going to be talking about that on shopthefirstlayer.com. And these are available for anybody anywhere, but mainly what we did, and Brian, you can speak a little bit to this as well. We decided to bring these in because we find that people need stuff on a weekend. And here in Calgary and out in Okotoks, there's nobody that's open on the weekend for this kind of stuff.
Yep.
So we decided, seeing as we've got a little kiosk, I guess, that we're opening up here very soon in Okotoks, that you will be able to get some 3D printer parts as you need them. We're going to start stocking more nozzles. We've got some MK8 nozzles in stock right now, just 0.4s. We are going to bring in other sizes, and we're going to bring in other brands, and MK10s will be coming in and that kind of stuff. So all stuff to be watching for. So if you're in the Calgary area and you need something on a weekend, don't hesitate to get in touch with us or look at our website on shopthefirstlayer.com, and they will be there. If we've got our Western 3D print services that we're working on for the kiosk, that mainly to print and on-demand service. So because we've got all these damn printers, we might as well make them useful, right?
Absolutely. And, with that, I kind of wanted to start off this week's show with just a little piece of advice. And this is about scheduling and about planning out jobs. So we've done a couple of commissions, Richard and I, and there always is a bit of confusion, especially for those who aren't within the 3D printer space, about time estimates. And as we know, things go wrong. You can't always control if you get a spaghetti thing, if you get a bad roll of filament. And so just make sure to budget that into your time when doing estimating. So we actually worked, basically Western 3D Services was kind of like a 6 to 9 month plan for us. And this opportunity arose to get the market space at such an incredibly good deal that we had to move it up to like a 6-week plan. So we've had our growing pains with this, in addition to producing, content for the channel and keeping our printers maintained and all that. Mm-hmm. And, we're still making it work out because likewise with the market, with everything that's been changing up here, the market schedule has changed a little bit too. So luckily we've been able to buy time because everybody's been delayed. But just know that it's acceptable and fairly normal out in the industry to have project delays, and make sure you just incorporate that up front. Now, the reason I specifically brought it up this week is, unfortunately, I do have some unfortunate news, which was that Matter 3D had actually suffered a break-in last week where a bunch of equipment was stolen, and that's why the filament that we talked about last week, the new colors, has been delayed a little bit because, I won't lie to you, it was in excess of $10,000, but luckily it wasn't any of the 3D printing materials, more so a lot of the marketing stuff. But there's a lot of back and forth. You can't plan for these sort of things. And, it threw them off a little bit. So, we wanted to go and share that with you guys so that you knew, what's kind of going on there, that it's not that we announced something and didn't come out. Unfortunately, there were some uncontrollable circumstances. So, give them some love, send them some love their way on their Facebook page. If you've been thinking about placing an order, maybe go ahead and get that order rolling with them there. But it's really tough suffering break-ins and any sort of unnecessary setbacks fuel, especially when it's out of your control. So,
you bet.
We're sharing this with you guys because, it can happen to anybody and all that. So, Yeah, thank you all those who have been supporting them so far. I'm even personally buying filament right off their site right now, even though I don't really need any, just because I wanted to send some love their way. And we're all well, I shouldn't say we're all Canadian, but likewise we're all trying to help each other out in this community there.
Yes, so do I actually. Peter Reynolds wants to know if we're going to carry heater blocks. Yes, we will. We have to order some in, and because we order them from China, they take about a month, sometimes a little longer to get here. I'm still waiting on parts that I ordered 2 months ago. So yeah, one of them's just some nuts.
The shipping's currently very volatile at the moment, and the other thing to bear in mind too with heater blocks, this is something you may not realize, but heater blocks come in several different sizes.
They do.
And unlike nozzles, they're not always registered as like an MK6, MK8. Unfortunately, I have none of them in front of me, but a lot of the blocks that I've ordered from overseas are actually smaller than an E3D V6 hot end. So there's benefits and disadvantages to that. But if you don't know what you're buying, it can be very tough. And that's why we usually say, if you're going to do an upgrade on your hot end, just upgrade all the parts at once, because then they're all going to interlink. Heat breaks, you can sometimes get away, like when we did the video on the titanium heat break, I think we replaced it on the Creality one there back then, but you can do little hiccups, but we want to make sure we're not, selling stuff that is not right for your machine, because it's going to be a headache for you, it's going to be a headache for us. So we're getting all of this together, but as I said, it was a 6-month plan that became a 6-week plan for this.
Yeah.
So, in the meantime, if you guys are looking for parts in the interim, send us a message. We are still getting emails for Western 3D Services worked out and boring IT stuff. But for now, if you send an email to questions@thefirstlayer.com and you're within kind of the Calgary area there, just mark in there, looking for item or something, and if we have it in stock, we can tell you how we can either get it to you, or you can come pick it up by one of our houses or something.
Yeah.
Because when your printer's down, you want to get it fixed quick. We understand that firsthand, and that's what our whole goal here is, to get your machines up and going when you need to get them up and going.
One of the other things that we've been talking about here on the channel, and for our shop, the First Layer, which is an extension of the First Layer. Right now, of course, we only have our t-shirts up there, and if you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it. Go and grab yourself a t-shirt, and we'll get them out to you. We have a local printer that does all of our t-shirt work here in Canada. If you're in the States or overseas, you can use our Teespring link, which is down below in the description. We would really appreciate that. We've got Super Chat turned on today. I want to thank all of our members. We're slowly getting up there in members, and I do appreciate that. Hey, there's Henry Stoffer with $1 in the US. Thank you very much. That's a cup of coffee for sure.
Wow, my chat's delayed from you for like 3 seconds. You said that, and then it popped up like 7 seconds later.
Yeah,
apologies if I missed your message because of that. Yeah.
Oh well, no worries. Also, I want to let you guys know that as we build out the store part of our website, we're going to be adding new stuff all the time. So, as well as you'll be able to find guides there. So if you don't know exactly what part you need for your printer, there's going to be guides there to guide you through if you need a nozzle, a heat break, a heater block, a thermistor, what have you. We're going to have different how-tos, or not how-tos, I'd say they're more informational white papers on what you need to replace on your printer and what the part numbers are and where you can get them if we don't have them. And so that's something that we really, really want to bring forward for you guys and really make your 3D printing life a little bit easier. That's kind of our goal right now.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get on to some questions.
Yeah, Joseph Jolly was saying nothing in the Orlando area to support 3D printers. I know it's not close, but Navarra 3D printing is down in by Fort Walton there. So it's a doozy of a distance for you, but if you need to order something, Trevor McIntosh, who's been kind of in the community for a long time, he runs Navarra 3D printing. Just order from him. It's at least close enough to you. So, we're not trying to go and say don't buy from anybody but us, but hey, if you can support local, go for it.
Brian, your camera has frozen, but your audio is still good.
Oh,
just so you know.
On. Oh my goodness, what has happened to OBS Studio? Woo! All right, 5 seconds here, guys.
Didn't they just do an update? All
I
right.
don't know. I'm still 26.1.1 here, so
All right. I'm going to read the first question that we have here in our email from this week. Comes from Greg Gillum. He says, "Hi, Richard and Brian. I recently upgraded my E3 Pro to 4.2.7 silent board, BL Touch, version 2 display, and filament runout sensor. Used the firmware that was listed at the site where I got the kit. I added G29 after G28 by Kara's startup code. It runs a 9-point touch every print, and I adjusted the E-steps while it was printing and got a nice layer. I stored the settings, and they were still showing at the next power-up. All seemed well, but it seemed that every time I go to print, the E-steps are way off, and I have to readjust and store again. It does this every time. I thought that was the purpose of the BL Touch. What am I missing? It's like it remembers the settings, probes the bed, and then goes whatever it feels like. I assume maybe I still need to turn something on. Help. This is from Greg's Vintage Workshop. Well, first and foremost, yes, you're saving it, but you're not saving it to be recalled. So, Brian, do you want to walk through that? You're our resident software guy, so I'll let you walk through that.
Yeah, so I mean, I saw a couple things in there, to be honest, that seem a bit unrelated. You're mentioning that you're changing your E-stops, which you really shouldn't ever have to. The E-steps. I'm sorry. The E-steps themselves is the number of pulses. So, I got a big old motor here attached to a spindle to give you an idea. And if I go and tick it and rotate it just a little bit, let's say, you'll ever feel a motor, you'll feel a little tick there as it goes through each step. And there's a certain degrees, which is usually 1.8 degrees per motor pulse, if you will. And the steps per millimeter just implies how many pulses it has to send to that motor before it would move the equivalent of 1 millimeter. And, it's never going to be, sometimes it is dead on, but usually it's a bit of micro adjustments there because it also takes into account the micro steps. Case in point is once you've dialed that in once for your machine, you should never have to touch it again. It should stay at that setting. And if you're saving to EEPROM, it should be writing in there. Now, what it sounds like is based off what you're saying the E-steps are all correct and set, but after you go do your homing and your bed leveling and you start doing your print, that E-step value changes. That says to me there's something in your G-code. And I'll see if we have something in here for Prusa Slicer for custom G-code. Let's see if I can bring this over for you guys. So it's a little bit small here, but in every slicer, they have a section where you can define what your start G-code is, what your end G-code is, before layer change, sometimes even after layer change. You'll see I have some custom logic down here that I've commented out for actually doing a temperature tower. But a lot of times in G-code, and I've seen this a lot in Cura, sometimes the default profiles overwrite all your acceleration settings, all of your jerk settings, and a couple different values all at the top, because sometimes people change them and the slicer says, no, this is based off this setting. I personally don't like that. I like to strip down my start G-code to simply be a home. In this case, I just habitually still have an M420, which reloads the bed leveling after G28. Of course, this is solved in the newest Marlin versions. I have it lift up, go to the center of the bed at a certain height to lift the nozzle, reset the extruder, and then it goes to position 1 and starts printing. Now, it sounds like in this G-code here, you have a line of code that is basically preventing it, it's resetting those steps per millimeter. And if we go ahead, I'm just going to try and pull up another window here. If we go and look up Marlin set steps per millimeter, there is a G-code file, M92, that you can actually overwrite the number of steps per unit without actually updating your firmware, without changing on the LCD. So I would check your G-code and just make sure there's nothing in there for an M92, because it does sound like it's going back to your whatever that program setting is. Now, the other option, too, is if this is happening across every single power-up here, what it sounds like is your EEPROM is not actually saving to the memory. And this does happen sometimes, especially when you flash lots of firmwares. So what I always recommend to do when you update the firmware on your printer, first and foremost, is go into the menu once it's booted and go into the settings and go down to reset failsafes. And what that does is it goes and pulls all the parameters from your programmed firmware, not from the EEPROM, and loads that into memory. Then go up to your save settings and save it just a couple of times just to make sure it writes. It doesn't hurt it. So, just go save settings, here at beep, do save settings again, and then you should be good thereafter. There can be issues with CRC checksums, which is a method of checking to see if the data in the EEPROM is valid. And especially in the earlier days of Marlin 2 with the STM chips, I had issues where if the checksum wasn't correct, it invalidated the EEPROM and wouldn't really ever load those settings back in. So by restoring the failsafe, it basically will pull the values back, and when you hit save, it'll go and flush right a clean EEPROM. There are some settings in Marlin 2.0.8 you can turn on in the firmware to say init EEPROM if there's a mismatch, but it still is kind of just, it doesn't all encompass versus just the restore failsafe and save. So give that a try, Greg, and if that's not working, if you can go ahead and send us your configuration and configuration advanced files over to questions@thefirstlayer.com, we'll take a quick look through it and see if there's something in there that is preventing your EEPROM from working properly.
All right, so we've got a couple more questions that came in. Henry Stofferin, another $1 into the coffee fund. Thank you very much for that super chat. We do really appreciate it. Every dollar helps.
Yes, absolutely.
And Henry's asking, did you ever get the SKR Mini E3 V2, and did you get it set up on your CR-10S? No, I never received it. I have sent them emails. They've totally decided not to talk to me about it. So at the end of the day, what are you going to do?
All of our foreign suppliers have kind of gone quiet all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So we're not sure what the story is right now. We're just toughing it out with what we got, to be honest with you. But Henry, if you are waiting specifically for that, just send us a message and we'll see what we can do to get you rolling. It's not too hard of an install, I won't lie to you. It's just a matter of making sure your motors are hooked up correctly and you've got a couple extra connectors for those few ones that go from 2-wire to an actual JST connector.
Now, Ben had made a comment here that the Creality 4.2.7 board doesn't use an EEPROM. I find that hard to believe because it has to have an EEPROM to store the original firmware.
I mean, yes and no caveat sort of thing. So within the die of the processor is a certain amount of memory, usually flash storage. And the reason why they don't like to use that for EEPROM settings is because the chip itself has a limited number of writes because it's a cheaper quality memory meant for more long-term rigidity versus I guess most of them have been going to WinBond chips, which are kind of like BIOS chips in your computer. They can handle much more writes. They're just not as high speed as that internal memory of the chip. The Creality board itself, I won't lie to you, I haven't looked at the schematic for the 4.2.7 board, but it would kind of surprise me that they removed that functionality. I know with the, what was it? Was it the E3, SKR E3 Mini 1.2 board was missing an EEPROM?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll have to take a look at this schematic, guys, but here's the photo of the 4.2.7 board, sorry. What we've got, if we look at various locations, over here, this one chip beside the USB port is a USB to serial bridge, and that's what's used to, when you connect your computer, that's why it shows up as a USB serial port, is because the communication between this chip and your ARM processor is a serial bus. It's not USB direct into that chip. Now, looking around the board, the one that really sticks out to me is not so much U10 here, but U1. Now, this U1 over on the left-hand side here is an 8-pin chip, which is a very common layout for an EEPROM chip, because usually you'll have a power, a ground, and then a couple of serial buses depending on how much data you need to stream. It's usually like address and data going into old-school technology there. But that sure looks like an EEPROM chip to me. So I'm going to actually, while we're watching the show, I'm going to see if I can find the schematics here and verify that for you. I'm very curious to see if it is missing an EEPROM. bouncing back to why I'm talking about this is because within Marlin, for those boards that never came with an EEPROM chip, there actually is a method where they write the EEPROM data to your SD card. And if you save a boatload of times or you have issues writing to your SD card or whatever, it's just way less reliable than a dedicated EEPROM chip. So check based off your specific board as well. I'm gonna dig into this because now I'm curious if Creality cheaped out on a 50-cent chip.
Here's another one for you from Austin EX or Austin X. He says, "Hello, I'm having issues with updating my CR-10 V2. I installed the drivers, but my computer is not seeing it at all." Well, it's not going to see it as a CR-10. It is going to see it as a serial connection. So you may want to check your USB ports to see where that serial connection is. And it's not, like I said, it's not going to say CR10. It's going to have a string of numbers behind it, letting you know that it's connected there. If you plug it in and then unplug it, you'll see where exactly it is. And you're going to do that by going into your device manager. And let me just pull a device manager up here. There we go, device manager.
Richard, is my video frozen, by the way?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, my whole PC just froze, guys. So I'm going to quickly reboot this thing.
Okay, let me go over. I'll go over to my screen here then, and we will we'll have a look at it here. All right, so you can see here, Austin, and anybody else who wants to know where this is. You can see here we've got all of our devices in the device manager. So if you go down to where it says port, and you click that little arrow, it's going to tell you if you've got anything on those COM ports. And right now I don't, so I don't have any serial communications going back and forth, so it's not going to show anything up. Also, where else you can find this is in the US or Universal Serial Bus Controllers. This will also tell you if you've... Why am I clicking there? I'm clicking on the wrong screen. I'm an idiot. Okay, so here we see a communication port on COM1. I've got obviously something plugged in there. And then if we go down to the universal serial port, this will tell you all the serial ports that are available right now to you and what might be on those ports. Let me just pull this aside here. It's confusing. I have way too many screens here. There we go. You guys can see this a little bit better. You can see under Universal Serial Port Controllers, you can see where everything is. Now, if we plug something in and then unplug it, let's take a board here real quick. I've got one. We'll just kind of find a USB cable that we can use. I know I've got one of those around here too. That will fit into this. What is going to fit into that? Probably not what I need. But I do have this board. You guys can't see me, so that's okay. Let's see if we can find a cable that I need. You ever have one of those days where you had all the stuff in front of you and then it miraculously disappears?
That's because you tried to clean up.
That's the story of my life. Well, I can't find a serial cable, and I'm not going to hold up it too much here today. But in any case, if you're looking at a board, we go top down here. You're going to plug into, obviously, right here. I don't have one that we can use at the moment. Head over to that. So this is where you're normally going to plug in to your computer, and it should come up as something. But it doesn't come up as the Creality board, just so you guys are aware, okay? Of course I'm invisible. Of course I'm invisible. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions coming in here. I'm ready for the next one, yes. Let's go back to my screen here. We'll get, I just have to organize some screens here. It says, Dear Richard and Brian, I have a question. My question is, what is PT100? Who should use it and when and why? Many thanks. PT100 is a thermistor. just like this. But they are designed to detect higher temperatures. Unlike these guys will only go to about 300 degrees before they become garbage. So if you want to reach higher temperatures, higher than 300 degrees, a PT100 thermistor, which is that, will be very handy for you. And they should be exactly what you need when it comes down to getting into higher temperature for higher temperature filament. Brian? Oh, he's still frozen. Brian's still not with us. Okay, I'm here all by myself. All by myself. Now I'm going to sing to you. I'm just going to let Jerry pop up the questions. I hope that answered your question. Yeah, it's really only used if you want to go to higher temperature plastic. What's next, G? He doesn't have one right away. So I guess I don't have it. There we go. The reason I ask is I need to set up the bed size on my CR-10S because it prints like an Ender 3 as far as bed size. I need help with that. Henry, no problem. I will get into a call with you later today, and we'll get you set up with that. We'll do a call maybe this afternoon, and we'll take care of that for you, and I'll show you exactly where to do that. All right, what's next? There we go. From Raymond Cleveland, what kind of filament TB? I'm not sure what TB is standing for. What kind of filament B? What kind of filament B? What kind of filament would you use higher temperatures on? You'd use it on ASA, you would use it on PEEK, you would use it on nylon. Nylon variants can be something that you want to get into higher temperatures. But that's pretty much it, as far as the plastic you're going to use for 3D printing. And the only reason you're going to go to those higher temperatures for those types of filaments, if you're going to print them, is because you want something that's super strong and structural. So ABS will do a lot of what you need it to do. PETG will do a lot of what you need it to do in terms of its stresses and the types of things that you can make out of it. So that's something to keep in mind. Next question.
I'm out.
You're out. Terrence Phillips says, Dear Richard and Brian, I have a question. My question is, we did that PT100. All right, did that one. Ben says it's a thermocouple. Yeah, it's a thermistor. We just covered that. Tell Brian to level his bed. That fixes everything. I don't even know if he can hear us yet. He needs to check his E-steps too. Okay. We're having fun here. Fat fingers, yes, you are. Raymond Cleveland says, Starlink caught him pirating. That's what 3 Second Cover says. Raymond says this tablet sucks. All right. Let's bring up that Raymond one. You are cool. Fat fingers, and yes, you are cool. I'm not sure what he means by cool. Maybe he forgot the L. I'm cool. My brother would never tell me I'm cool, ever. It's not something we do in our family. Oh.
I promise I wasn't pirating. I promise. No.
Sterling caught you.
Yeah, no, it's, oh my goodness. Well, I mean, my PC hasn't been rebooted in a good month and a half or so here, so, as soon as it shut down and rebooted, it's like, hey, I got an idea. How about we catch up on all those Windows updates?
I did that this morning.
Here's a great one from Shaggy Man. I love this. He says, can you recommend a replacement for a Tivo Tornado? Yes, it's called a Creality CR-10 version 2.
The Tornado, when it first came out, it wasn't that bad of a machine, honestly. I never got my hands on one of them, so...
We had one, didn't we?
We had a Tornado, and we got rid of it.
100% Arnold's fault. I tried to put him on camera, and what does he do? He breaks everything.
Okay, let's
Richard.
see. What do we got here for another question? Yeah, he says a Tivo is a dead product. Now, actually is a good point. Because it's a dead product, doesn't mean it's obsolete. Okay, because it still falls into the range of current 3D printer technology, it's not obsolete. All you're going to have to do is get some parts for it if you need to fix it up. Other than that, you've got a perfectly good printer there. The Tivo Tornado is not a bad printer at all, to be perfectly honest with you. You're just going to have to do a little bit of work to shore it up. And now, as far as Tivo goes, they've been around for a while. They came out with a lot of printers shortly after Creality hit the market, so they were kind of Creality's competition at that point.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big surge in 2018, 2019, and the early part of 2020, where a lot of Chinese companies were building 3D printers and they were basing it on other people's technology. So do I want to say that they were stolen designs? No, because most of these companies are open source and they will make everything open source. So,
And as for dead printers, before you think a printer is dead, okay, this is my funny printer thing of the week. Quickly, this is going to become the same thing as the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I was watching a movie that just came out called Stowaway. And if you haven't heard it, it's a space movie. And the big thing was the main consultant was Scott Manley, a major YouTuber who does all sorts of analysis of like Starlink launches and all that stuff. Anything space related. So I watched this getting all excited, expecting this to be this really high-tech movie. And I'm going to show this, and because of me shooting it from a phone, there's a good chance we won't get dinged for copyright here. But we had a friendly little 3D printer reference in this movie here. And you'll see here, why, look at that. That's an OG MakerBot replicator. And I kid you not, you can hear the humming of the whole machine during this scene. And they're printing the, I think it's Voron, the cast that was out for a while there. They print the Voron the cast for someone who broke their arm in this movie. And I laughed so hard when I saw this. I said, this is the future. We're going out into Mars and all that stuff, and we're using a printer from 2013 with no silent steppers. Come on, guys.
Okay, before we get into any more questions, I've got one here from LB Sharp. He says, first of all, I'd like to say that you guys are great. Well, thank you very much. We do appreciate that. I've been playing around with photogrammetry, and now I have a couple of friends that want me to make hollow statues of them so they can store their drinks in, like vodka, rum, etc.
Okay.
But everything I've read about says that because of the layers can trap germs in between them, this is not safe. Is there a way of coating the inside to prevent this, or do I need to find some new friends? Well, first and foremost, I think you have to find less alcoholic friends. That would be my first.
I mean, anybody who's a narcissist enough to want to drink out of their own head, I mean. Okay, so just in general with FDM printing, I got a cube here, like a really bad cube, kind of just to show you why things are considered not food safe. So, oh my gosh, my camera's so far back now we have no light. Layer lines, if you run your finger across that, you can feel every single little groove. In fact, you can hear it. And the main thing is it's very difficult to keep that clean. Now, alcohol in itself is a disinfectant, so usually you're not too worried about the mold and the mildew and all that. But what you got to watch for is all the composite materials that are both in the model you printed and in your entire printer design from all the different filaments you've ran over time. There's microparticles sometimes. Richard, you're just fluctuating in and out there.
I know, I'm going crazy right now.
I'm seeing speckles, I'm seeing, oh my goodness. But anyways, the main thing you have to watch for is the quality. You basically have, if you're going to do food grade stuff, you should have a food grade dedicated machine that doesn't run anything except for food grade materials. And it's because primarily of all those cross contaminants all the way through your infrastructure. You normally need certification to have a food grade facility, for instance, and it is no different with these little guys. Now, if you're trying to kind of cheat around it, truth be told, I don't have very much experience in the space of food grade resins and all that. Ideally, at the end of the day, you would want to coat that entire interior to be a food safe container. Now, there is another option here, which is use your 3D print as a shell for an already mass-produced safe food containment. Whether it be a flask, whether it be like a little pill bottle-sized chamber or something that has already been food-grade certified, and then you make your 3D print a wrapper around that. Sure, you won't get the entire volume of the inside that you would if it was just an outer shell, but this way, you guarantee that you're not going to have to deal with all those food-safe issues. I would only look at coating it interiorly if you're doing major batches of them, where you do need that entire volume and you're mass producing them for retail sale and whatnot. And that's a whole different area of liability we'll cover as we go through that with our business here. But for now, yeah, please get something, you know, if they really want something fun, make a cozy. Like take your can, almost all cans are the same size. If you need to, take a caliper and measure the outside and make a cylindrical hole inside that model. So, you know, make it so that they pop open their head and there's the top of the can and they can go and sip right off the can. Yeah. That's what I would definitely recommend for that project.
All right, what's our next one here, Jerry? From Peter Reynolds, do you have any idea when Matter 3D might start their recycling project? We have not heard. They are starting to take things like empty spools, and they're starting to take people's PLA and other materials. I have some in the back of my car that I actually have to get over to Amon and Stephanie, or Stephanie, who's here in Calgary, and Amon's out in Victoria. And then they're going to ship it back to them. But I have no idea when that exact date is going to start. And with their recent break-in, it's probably going to be put off for a little while.
Mm-hmm. So just talking a little bit about that, there was a comment in there about the ISS has a 3D printer. They absolutely do. In fact, they've had it since about 2014 here. And this is a really cool thing to look into because if you notice, their design is actually not that much more different than what we have. Now, sorry, Richard, I guess it's a little off-center there, but if we can pull me up full screen here. This is NASA's little 3D printer they have at the space station. And I can't recall what material they're going to, they print on it there, but you'll notice even with a zero-G environment, what we have is we have a round rod here. We have the same sort of bearings you would expect to see, and same thing with the clamps that you would see on something such as a Prusa on the early days. And it's just, you know, more so an industrial grade enclosure. You got the carbon filter at the bottom because particulates in space would be bad. But you can see here from these lab prints, they basically got ready to print up tools up there, and that was the big thing. So up at the top here, you can see we got a little wrench with a square adapter there, and that was basically a wrench designed to integrate with their existing tools they have on the ISS. And what really amazed me is even in the low gravity environment, it's still basically a bed slinger. In fact, if you take a look at the sliding bed here, it's got a more defined rail to slide it back and forth, but the X and Y is just built right at the top, just with all metal to make it last. So this is why it's so neat. You can see the lines down here where they had to CNC it to make it fit whatever form location it's located in. But the technology is not that different from what we're doing down here. And this is why, you know, the hobby space, I think, given that this happened in about, what do they say here, 2014. So during the flight certification. So they're still using older style technology up there. And if you maintain your printer correctly, all you're basically upgrading for is new features or a bigger build volume. But sometimes you don't always need the biggest build volume, such as this. If you need to print wrenches, you can get away with something like an Ender 3 or smaller. So, you know, it's cool to see these being used in a practical location where, you know, you simply wouldn't have access to tools. This is the most extreme example, but if you live in a rural town and you need a specific, let's say you've got an auto shop that needs a very specific lug nut there are certain materials you could print to at least get it going for them rather than waiting 6 to 8 weeks. And that's what I'm really excited with the future of 3D printing in general, is being able to build things in places where you would normally require an entire manufacturing facility. So I'm going to be looking more into the ISS stuff, and if I can find some cool content to share with you guys about projects up there, then, you know, for sure we will we'll share it with you. But I'd love to see what you guys are doing with your practical 3D printers. Are you doing something practical in your community that you feel is or that you don't feel is very important, because it might actually be really important and really neat. I forgot, I actually have a friend messaging me because they're going to need hamster wheelchairs for some disabled hamsters. I'm like, you know what? Let's do it. It's going to cost me a couple bucks of material. Let's just do it for fun.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'm
Right?
down. Okay, I'd
like to see what a resin printer does in zero G. Ooh.
Yeah, you don't want to put a resin printer in
Terrible.
zero
You ever
G.
seen that Simpsons episode where Homer opens the bag of chips? Yeah, probably that.
Dominic Versetto says, I'm considering a larger format printer. I love my Ender 5 Pro. I'm considering an Ender 5 Plus. Is the CR-10S a better choice?
No, I wouldn't say so. But
I would say they're both, to be perfectly honest, I would say they're both on the same plane in terms of their output. Buying an Ender 5 Plus or a CR-10S V2 or V3, depending on which one you go with, the quality of print you're going to get is going to be almost identical from both those printers. So it really depends what your aesthetic is in your shop or in your print room. If you need something that's all enclosed, then a CR-10S is not your choice. If you want something that has a full frame, everything's in a nice clean line, then the Ender 5 Plus would be the way to go. But at the end of the day, I don't think either one of them will give you different results from the other. So, what's your budget? That would be my question.
And the big thing too to remember, and this is kind of why I like the Ender 5 over the Creality, over the CR-10S, is because it has to do with how your weight shifts on the bed. So if you ever look at an Ender 5 Plus, no need to really even pull up a photo. Unlike the original Ender 5, this one moves the Z rod to the side and adds another one on the opposite side. So you actually have equal loading lifting up and down. That was kind of the problem with the Ender 5, is that it only lifted on the back end. And so there was a chance of it kind of bouncing on the tip on the far end. But when you have 4 guided rods feeding it up and a Z rod on each side, it's going to be pretty darn stable.
You bet.
So, the big thing, the reason why we're building the Voron really versus going with something like this Cartesian style Ender 5 is because the Voron doesn't ever move the bed. And because the bed does not move, your weight threshold for your model is theoretically infinite, because you're never going to have the model itself moving around. When your rods go up, and when you're lifting the bed up and down, as you print more material, you're going to add more weight to that, and that can cause issues. With a CR-10S, with a CR-10S, as you build upwards and you add more weight, now you have more weight shifting on the bottom, and you got to think of your model like a building in an earthquake zone, where it's still going to fluctuate a bit at the top, but the main point is to keep it counterbalanced. So you need to almost sometimes slow down the higher you go. But when you deal with, and I hate to call them Core XYs, I'm just going to call it a cube printer because Ender 5 Plus is not a Core XY.
No, it's not.
With a printer like that, your only inertial force is your hot end on the very top. So the lighter you can make that, the faster you can go, the higher the acceleration you can set, because you're not moving the mass of your print. So that's why I like these printers, in addition to the fact that, as mentioned, with a bed slinger, you have to take your bed width, almost times it by, 1.5 and say that's your total Z space you need. In case in point, even with the Costco one behind me here, the 28-inch depth, I still have printers hanging off the edge. Whereas a cube one with the same build volume takes up less space. So yeah, it is going to come down to cost, but I would personally say the Ender 5 Plus will treat you better in the long run than the CR-10S at this point. I think bed slingers are slowly becoming a thing of the past, and you shouldn't look at them anything above 300 by 300 at this point.
Well, at the end of the day, bed slingers are meant for those of us that are getting into the hobby. They're fairly inexpensive now. They're fairly reliable. They're easy to maintain for the most part. And they're a great learning tool. I mean, you're not going to go out and buy a framing hammer that uses an air assist if you don't know how to use it. You're going to use a traditional hammer like you should to learn how to do things, right? And it's the same thing with 3D printers. You're going to buy your first 3D printer so that you can learn about 3D printing. And the funny thing I find about this hobby is that not only are we learning about 3D printing, but we're also learning about engineering. We're learning about electronics. We're learning about kinematics and the movement of how our printers work and how we can get the best print quality out of a low-cost printer. In terms of the Voron, you have to understand why it's not a bed slinger is because the bed itself is 8 millimeters thick and it is all aluminum. It's actually tooling aluminum, which is a little heavier than regular aluminum. It also does not change in shape when it's heated up like the regular beds that we have. We all get beds on our 3D printers that are never flat, but tooling aluminum is truly flat. It's equal all the way around. And you know, even after you've heated it up, you're going to have a stable flat bed. So that for us, as we build into our print farm, and we print and we build machines that are specific for that purpose, we need reliability, we need ease of maintenance, and we need speed. And those are the three things that the Core XY on the Voron give us over your traditional Mingdas and your Lotmaxx and your Crealities and everybody else.
Now, what I'd like to show you guys real quick, because we do talk a lot about Ender 5s often, and not being a Core XY. Now, in the future, we're slowly going to move over talking a little bit about CNC stuff, but mostly with how it helps you with your 3D printing. We're not going to become a CNC channel or anything there. But what I wanted to show you here is just a base photo of a CNC, or what we call as a CNC router, because CNC can also have like multi-axis stuff and everything. But most of you will think of a CNC looking like this these days. And this is essentially what the Ender 5 looks like at the top, is you've got two rails on the side that slide back and forth for your Y travel, and then that actual travel also carries the X-axis back and forth. Now, the reason why it works on an FDM printer is because this top part is extremely light normally. Now, when you get into the CNC realm, luckily it travels slow enough that the weight up here shouldn't impact your vibration. But the core idea of a CNC is no different than Marlin. You have G-code, and it goes and moves to XY points based off moving an X and Y motor. Whereas a Core XY design actually uses both, and we can't really call them X and Y steppers anymore. We call it kind of stepper 1 and stepper 2.
Yeah.
And it basically, the combination of the two allows it to move in different directions. And we'll try and visualize that when we start getting into our Voron build to show you how exactly that works. The reason I wanted to cover this design is so you can understand that in a CNC realm, your material you're cutting, because it's subtracted manufacturing, is going to be extremely heavy, sometimes 50, 60 pounds potentially. And with a bed slinger, you couldn't do that, because if you were constantly moving that'd be so much jerk and heavy load on all your belts. You'd have to have a rack and pinion design even. It's just a lot of load. So what they do is they make sure that the only part that's moving on the system essentially is your tool. In this case, our hot end, or in the case of the CNC, your drill. So what I'm trying to get at is the best design for a printer is going to be the one that has the least number of moving parts, and the parts that are moving to be the most lightweight. And that's why the Voron 2.4 doesn't move the bed. Now, Ben Brady there corrected me too, that the Voron 0 and Switchwire does move the bed up and down, similar to the Ender 5, but up and down is still a better movement than slinging a Y, and it's because, again, the number of changes. So ideally, without Z-hop, your motor should only be moving that bed when you're doing a layer change or some kind of retraction. And that will cause it to be much more stable, and because you're only moving up and down, you're very unlikely to see vibration artifacts from that load moving up and down unless you're really ripping it at a fast speed.
Yeah.
So this is why you're going to see a lot more printers coming to the market where it's either a Cartesian style like this, where your hot end's at the top and the bed moves up and down, or you're going to see it like the 2.4, where this is all attached to the Z-rod instead of the bed. And we're kind of going through this each step. I know a lot of people are asking for updates. it's because we're still getting all our materials in, and it's just been delaying a few videos.
Yeah.
But hopefully we should have it, I believe, next week, not this
No,
upcoming
next week we
the-
got something else we got to put out. I recorded, here's something I got to tell you guys about this before I get on to the next email question. Is I recorded 2 videos. Both of them didn't have sound. So, you'd think I've been doing this long enough that I would know to check that, but for whatever reason I didn't. So I did 2 full videos that have no sound. Nothing.
So if you guys want us to release the video with Richard overdubbing himself in a comedic fashion, maybe we can make that happen.
Yeah, we might be able to. That being said, so that's why nothing came out this week, is because although I have stuff recorded, I have to go back and redo it, which means I have to take apart pieces I've done on the Voron already so that you guys can see what I've done. So, real quick, here, this one's from Morgan Pierce, one of our good friends here in Calgary. And I want to bring up this picture while we look at, or we talk about his question.
Morgan.
He says he's experiencing repeating layer lines variation every 5 to 7 millimeters on the Mingda Rock 3. He says he used the profiles that I sent him. One difference he notices is that in the profile, the Z-hop, when retracted, was turned on. That's not going to cause this problem.
No.
Because he's got a few more photos. So down at the lower end of this looks like crap. But if we go up a little higher, we can see here that it's correcting itself. So what this tells me is that the very bottom of the Z-axis is shifting too much. So maybe what you're going to need to do in this case, Morgan, is to, and we'll go on to another picture here, and you can see that it's corrected itself all the way up here. But down here at the lower end, they look pretty consistent. So that tells me you've got a little bit of wobble down at the bottom. So it's just going to be a matter of loosening some screws and just straightening that up a little bit. And if you have any problem with that, Morgan, we can meet this week, and because I know you're in town, we can meet this week, and we can I can do some quick adjustment and show you how to do that.
Yeah, this is a great photo to actually have, because this shows you what happens when your Z rod has a misalignment. Because if I almost pulled out my calipers just to triple check, but each one of those bands is consistently happening at a certain height, a certain number of millimeters.
Yep.
And sometimes, I mean, it can be various things. More often than not, and you want to look at kind of the edge, if you will, of your vertical walls to see. If you see the wobble on the edges, then you know for sure it's your Z rod is shifting kind of back and forth. But sometimes if it looks straight and it's still wobbling, it could be a clear sign too that you have some binding on your Z rod, and you may need to go in there and clean it good with a microfiber cloth. Add a little bit of a non-binding lubricant, such as a sewing machine oil or a PFTE liquid, just something that will help lubricate it, because otherwise you're basically driving that Z rod with a stainless steel rod against a brass bearing, and eventually it's going to etch away at that nut, and you're going to start getting a lot of vibrations, inconsistencies, and all that, and then you just have to throw out the brass piece and buy a new one.
Yeah,
I can tell you first and foremost, some of these darn printer companies are using stupid proprietary ones. I gave Richard a bunch the other day for the Creality ones, because I'd like to see you guys try and source one of those T8 nuts right now. They are surprisingly uncommon, and the round ones that have 4 holes are not bored at the same hole distance as the Creality ones, so you can't use them.
There you go. What else we got there, Jerry? Have you got another question coming in? Nope.
Terrence Phillip, I really hope your name is a South Park reference, but could you tell me why some use MGN9 and some use MGN12, please? Thanks again. Simply put, MGN rails, the number indicates the actual spacing of the holes on the carriage there, and you go with bigger rails when you need more weight tolerance. So unfortunately, I have all of my bearings downstairs, but the ball bearings inside those carriages get bigger as this size goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the idea with a linear rail is that your ball bearings are round and are lubricated, and they ride in a little channel on there and hopefully their tolerance should be tight enough that they can't wobble back and forth. That's what makes them so accurate. Now, if you don't have enough lubricant, or if the bearings are too undersized for the weight that's being applied against them, they can deform, they can degrade, and eventually they will fail completely. Similar to a roller coaster, you wouldn't want to put a roller coaster up with tractor tires or something, right? You know, that's weighted for a certain weight class, that it might run fine when you have no passengers, but when you add passengers, all of a sudden the weight's exceeding it, and it may work, but it's wearing at an exponentially higher rate.
You bet.
So for the Voron, they recommend MGN 9s, and I have purchased a bunch of those because the X and Y gantry, apart from the weight of the aluminum and the shifting around there, it's really not that much. And an MGN 9 rail can handle a lot of weight. Now, where it changes, for instance, is with my CR-10 behind me here that's a bed slinger. I bought MGN 15s for that because the rail is so thick that it can actually support itself across the 600 millimeters travel without the need for 2020 aluminum underneath to maintain that rigidity. Now, if I went with a 12, because I did try with a 12 for a bit on my big printer downstairs, the rail actually sagged from the weight of it, even with no build on there. So when we're dealing with this, the reason they go with 9, simply put, is because up and down is very lightweight. If it was a bed slinger, they would be going with a 15 or potentially even higher, depending on the weight back and forth. Hopefully that...
The other thing about the MGN rails is that as you go up in number, that actual slider that goes up and down the rail is bigger as well. So the rail itself is bigger, so is the bearing block. It's bigger as well. So those are things to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. Bigger means more weight. Mm-hmm. Bigger also means that you may have an easier time with travel. But the longer the run, you got to make sure that it's completely square going up. Because if you're off anywhere, that bearing block is going to bind, and you're going to find yourself in some really, really deep trouble.
Absolutely, yeah. The now with you actually kind of nailed it on the nose there. The reason they chose MGN 9s as well is because the height of that block in there combined is much less. Therefore, you can maximize the build space within yours. Yes. So for my big machine I'm building, which is about, I think the build volume is going to theoretically be 580 by 580 by 1000. Like, I'm really breaking all the rules with this thing. I'm actually tempted to modify it to use MGN 12s just because of the size of it, but I have to redo all the calculations that were done within there because now I'm adding like 2 or 3 millimeters on every single axis. And that will impact your aluminum. So if you're thinking about trying to sub them out, you're going to have to do a lot of redesign on that on the XY core aspect of it, just to make it work. So that's just my big caveat for you guys is we are trying to stick with the build that Richard's showcasing to be as stock as possible because all of that math and work has been done in advance. Yeah. We don't want to re-engineer this machine. We want to utilize the hard work that was put in already and then take advantage of the cost savings by not having a firm build it for us.
You bet. Now, some of the other things that we're thinking about with this, because we already have stuff in our stock between Brian and I, is I'm not using their SSR. I got this one from Brian yesterday. I'm going to be using this SSR when my mat comes in for my bed. But I'm also going with the SKR 1.3, which I will be using. And here's the biggest problem. And I'm just going to pull this out right now. In the build, they suggest that you use a 200-watt power supply, which is more than enough for a Voron 3D printer because none of the work is being done like a regular printer. So it is, all the work is being done on the Raspberry Pi, and then it's just transmitting its signal to tell it what to do to the board. Now we're going to use this Meanwell. This is a Meanwell LRS 350, but I'm also going to use a buck converter instead of using the small 5 watt or 5 volt or 5 watt power supply from Meanwell that they suggest. I mean, it's a $35 touch that I can get around with a $3 part. Will I change that eventually? Probably. Will I make it exactly what it should be? Probably. But for now, we want to get this up and running. We want to start printing with it. We've got orders that are starting to come in for Voron parts, which is something that we are going to actively be doing. And Brian and I have talked about it. We have a list of what the actual part list is. Now, when you're ordering part lists or 3D printed parts for your Voron, if you don't have anything to print them with, then you're not going to get everything that you think you're going to get. You're not going to get the skirts because they don't know what size you're building. You're not going to get a couple of other 3D printed parts because, again, they don't know what size you're building. So at the end of the day, you're going to get what's necessary to get the machine up and running. So you're not going to get the little clips that go around the outside to hold all the panels on. You're not going to get any of that. You're just going to get the mechanical parts that you need from 90% of the people out there. If we know in advance what size you're building, we can print the skirts for you, and we can do all that. That guy's bad luck. He's going to freeze your frame.
Yeah, I'm going to keep him on camera now because I have trust issues with him.
If you're getting flakes of filament around the gear for a direct drive extruder, what's the fix? The reason that you're getting filament flakes is because the gear itself, and I had one here earlier. I've got one right here, as a matter of fact. Tell you exactly what's happening. Come on out of there. There we go. The wrong thing I took out. And now I'm throwing stuff on the ground.
Just remember, anytime you have 3D printing, you know, you're going to have two materials rubbing against each other is the simple point.
Yeah.
And, yeah, Rich is going to pull it up, but...
So what's happening here is in this gear, the filament sits against this gear, and then the gear turns to pull the filament through. Okay, so it's going to pull it through. Now, the problem being is that you've got tension on one side, and if there's too much tension, this gear, just like anything else, is going to start to pick up some of that plastic, and it's going to sit in the gear teeth, especially if it's really tight. Then you can also notice other things like under extrusion. The best way to get rid of that is just every once in a while, go ahead and just clean that off with a little brush. I've got a little brush that I just go in there and just clean the brass with real quickly, and that pretty much solves my problem. But that's something that you should consider when you are dealing with that. In Creality direct drive and also their Bowden setup, it's really hard to adjust that spring tension that's keeping that idler bearing against this gear, because this is the gear that moves your filament. So something to be aware of.
Yeah, Hammer of Doom, you're saying square gear pushing against a round tube. You're not wrong. I mean, it's actually a sawtooth in actuality, but it's funny you mentioned square gear pushing around round tube. Remind me of Apollo 13, where that was their solution, getting a square filter into a round hole. But, you know, at the end of the day, back and forth, you know, even if I have a cube like here and I'm sitting here with my fingernail and I'm scratching it nonstop, at a certain point, one of three things is going to happen. My nail is going to start to chip, this material is going to start to chip, or the friction of them both touching each other is going to cause them to heat up, and then they are going to become malleable as a result of their properties. Gotcha. So an issue I had this week, actually, with my big extruder was I didn't realize I'd actually over-temped my motor where it ran at a hotter temperature. And what was happening was that heat transferred up to the shaft and therefore heated up the gear. And as it was going against the PLA, it was slowly heating the PLA just enough to start peeling off microscopic layers. And at a certain point, my entire gear's teeth were filled with pieces of PLA. And that's what happens when it gets hot. Now, when it's cool and doesn't, it usually flakes. And you'll see this either when the gear is too tight, or if you're actually entering your extruder assembly at too harsh of an angle onto your hole, and that constant rubbing of it goes through and will either etch away at your PLA, and actually more often than not will also start to etch away at your aluminum. And that's why PLA is really interesting, is even though it's a soft material, it will etch away at metals. So make sure your path of your filament going right into that extruder is as straight as possible. Usually I just take a piece of Bowden tube and kind of slide up against there just to help guide it in, because the Bowden tube internally, for those who didn't realize, the PFTE is naturally lubricated. And so it's kind of akin to a slip and slide, right? Where, you know, you don't need water, but you can still glide something along it fairly smoothly. You can slip on it. And that's the idea with filament, with the why we use PFTE tubes, is because there's little to no resistance inside that tube. So the force going on your filament has nowhere to go except downwards on its own filament rather than against the outside of your tubing.
There was a really good comment here from Hammer of Doom. He says Flexion extruders fix that. Yes, they do to some degree because they have a little brush that constantly cleans that gear. But
it's also a $200 Canadian extruder.
Yeah. Chad Wilcox has a question. This is the last one for today. He says, good afternoon, gentlemen and lady. I have a CR-10 V2 and I have a Chimera direct drive with a Volcano hot end. I want to install it with a 0.1 nozzle. Can I adjust the E-steps in the start G code or in firmware?
That's a trick question.
That is a trick question.
Trick question. You do not need to change your E-steps at all.
When you go to a higher nozzle, and I'm going to open up Cura here because I have it. There we go. Let me just take us into Cura for a second. Brian's audio is on, still good. There we go.
Oh, good. Good. You
all
can
right.
still hear me.
Yeah. Let me turn off these lower thirds here. All right. So you can see here that we've got a model on a build plate, and this is for a CR-10. We've got it on a CR-10 for whatever reason. Now up here, right in the center, you see where it says generic PLA. It'll be highlighted on your screen now. 0.4 millimeter nozzle. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you change that nozzle size in here. And if you're using a 0.1 nozzle, that's pretty small. That's really small.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are you're going to end up with more clogs than you want. To be perfectly honest with you, I would, if you're thinking of a 1.0, which might be what you're looking at, I think that this is where you're going to change that anyway. So you're going to change it here underneath your generic PLA, whatever material you're using, you're going to change that nozzle size. You don't have to change E-steps. You don't have to change anything else. Just change the nozzle size. All the math will be adjusted for you within the program. Apologies, 1.0. Yeah. Like I said.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, if you're printing minis with a 0.1 nozzle, you might as well get a resin.
Yeah. So in this case, you know, a 1.0, you're just going to change it here in your slicer. And I'm assuming, Chad, that you are using Cura as your slicer. So that's something to be aware of, okay? So just change that there, and that will change all the math for you. And you don't have to do anything with E-steps because you've already got them adjusted for your direct drive. Okay?
So I've got the nice lunar moon here hanging over Arnold here.
I got to
go back to it here.
There we go. Got to get back to us. Yeah.
Perfect. So what I wanted to show you guys here, I'll move the ring into place, is at the end of the day, you know, treat this as your extruder motor, as a giant version with a piece of filament moving through at the bottom. The steps per millimeter is telling this motor how far I have to turn to move 1 millimeter of filament, okay? And so it's along this outside edge. Now, if this wheel was smaller, let's say with that little inner ring there, then the steps per millimeter will be different because it actually takes more of a rotation to move one item along this ring. Think of it kind of like an orbit, right? Whereas when you're out here, a smaller movement can equate to a bigger change. And when you're changing your nozzle size, it doesn't change the filament at this point. You still have 1.75 millimeter thick filament at this point, and you're still going to move it. Now that's where that slicer setting comes into play, is when you define your nozzle size, not only does the slicer determine the number of passes and lines and so forth, it has mathematics inside that converts those flat lines, if you will, to a volumetric equivalent, knowing what your nozzle size is saying, and says, okay, if I'm drawing a line that's 10 millimeters long, I'm going to need to extrude X number of distance because I know it's going to shrink down in that nozzle to that size. So, you know, if you use the 0.4 setting, for instance, it's going to be over extruding to no end. You're going to get all sorts of junk everywhere. But with the 1.0 nozzle, it'll be kind of blipping out and all that. It won't look quite right. So when you change it to 1.0, the slicer knows, hey, I need to push more millimeters of filament through the extruder. And it does the compensation for you there so that you're not changing the steps per millimeter with the nozzle size. And that's why changing nozzles shouldn't be a scary thing. Richard and I, we talked about it, like we have a rate if we need to change the nozzle size on our machines for a print. But it's, we're not just changing nozzles for the sake of replacing broken ones. We can literally swap it out, have G-code files on our machine for 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, 1.0, and swap it out within 3 minutes across a print job without changing any print settings. Now, the only little caveat to that I'll leave you here with this Sunday is when you go to a bigger nozzle, even with the same speed, for instance, if you go from a 0.4 to a 1.0, you're extruding on a very simplistic level 2.5 times the amount of filament that you were at the same speed. So it's not uncommon to actually slow down your print speeds as you go up a nozzle size and still save a bunch of print time. So just keep that in mind, because there is such a thing as volumetric maximums for your hot end. We just don't talk about it much. It's simply put, if you try and flow too much, it's going to click. And don't be surprised if 40 millimeters per second is unachievable on your machine with a 1.0 nozzle.
Now there's one from Jason Peters here that I really want to have a look at.
I've heard about this thing here.
I have not.
So he's saying, have you guys used the Meatpack plugin for Octoprint yet? Is it any good? Should I enable it in Marlin, just use it on Octoprint? Okay, so if you're going to use Meatpack or Arc Welder or any of these things, you need to make sure your printer's firmware supports it first.
Yes.
So if you read through the section, if you watch my video this week about upgrading Marlin to 2.0.8, we do kind of scroll past the Meatpack plugin portions. If you have the memory in your firmware, go ahead and enable it.
Yes.
It's not going to change. It's just going to make it available to you. And that's why I always say, is especially with the 32-bit boards, is start loading up all those features until it tells you your memory's overflowed, and then pull them back a little bit. Meatpack is basically an optimized G-code parsing algorithm that just kind of shortens your G-code for the printer. And it's good for things like Octoprint, where you're sending serial data, because then it reduces the payload size it's sending to the printer nonstop. I've heard things about it, but again, because I don't use Octoprint, the actual benefit of me using it is very minimal right now. But definitely look into it. Look into Arc Welder and into the G2, G3 Arc settings in your firmware, and just enable it and have it ready for if you're ready to experiment there. The only one you can't enable without disabling other features is the direct stepping feature in Marlin, which kind of turns it into a Clipper clone sort of thing. It doesn't work with Linear Advance. So if you intend on using Linear Advance, you have to shut that off to enable direct stepping. And I do use a bit of Linear Advance for my machine, because with such a big nozzle, I have to do that to prevent blobbing. So simply put, hopefully that answers your question. That Meatpack is cool. You can give it a try.
I've never used it, so
yeah, it's just a method of compressing G-codes. So
there you go.
If you want to kind of experiment, then please do let us know what your experience is. I just don't have it on my roster for things to try right now, because I personally won't see a major benefit.
So now, just for clarity here, Henry, yes, I will contact you in a couple of hours. I'm going to have some lunch here, and I have a couple of things I have to take care of, but I will contact you in a couple of hours, and we'll go from there. So yes, that's pretty much it for our show for today. We are working on the Voron. It's actually sitting here behind me. If you go onto the Voron Facebook group, you'll see I've got pictures of where it's at right now. I'm still waiting on my bed. Somebody was asking about sourcing, and I think it was Ben Brady. Really quickly, the sourcing guide is a great resource to getting the parts that you need. Now, where you're getting them from can be a premium, because they are using a lot of premium parts. I had to order my actual bed, the aluminum bed, from Germany, because I could not source one in Canada at a reasonable cost. And and that met the spec, and I couldn't source one out of the US because the company that actually sells them in the US doesn't ship to Canada. So when everything was said and done, I ended up buying it from a company out of Germany. It's coming UPS. It should be here next week. I still need to get myself a Canovo heater for it. So there's still a few things I have to do to make this machine functional. Currently, I can wire it all up, get all my steppers going, test everything, and make sure everything's working. But I just don't have a bed to put on it right at the moment. The switch wire is something that Brian and I talked about yesterday. We might be doing a switch wire conversion on an Ender 3 later in the year. If that's something that you guys want to see, great. And in answer to Roscoe 3DP, yes, I will be running Clipper on the Voron because that's the way the Voron works. So that's pretty much that in a nutshell. With that, I am going to say that's the end of our show. Yeah, Firmware Labs. That's where I bought mine from. And here's the thing. From the euros to the Canadian dollar, landed at my door was cheaper than buying it unspec'd in Canada. So there we go. Thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you to all of our members. Really quickly, if you have questions throughout the week, send them to questions@thefirstlayer.com. Because if we don't get the questions at firstlayer.com, chances are we're going to miss them. If you send them to me directly, I'll miss them. If you send them to me through info, we'll usually miss them because they end up in our trash bin. But if you send them to questions@thefirstlayer.com, we always get them. So that's the best way to get a hold of us. If you've got some comments or something that you need us to get back to you on immediately, send it there, and please put in urgent in your description so that we can try and get back to you throughout the week. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. It all depends on our schedule, and I've got a lot of stuff I have to go back and redo now. So all the stuff that I did on this machine, I have to now take it all apart, redo again, just to show you guys. So with that said, that's pretty much all that we've got for you today. Thank you for those that contributed to our pocket fund. Thank you again to everybody that...
you know what? I didn't even say it today. Super chat. That's for you.
Jerry said it a couple of times.
Did she? I kind of missed it. I don't know. Maybe she was just quieter today.
Ricky B, I am getting back to you. Sorry. That was part of what I was talking about earlier. You've got a pretty long question. We're going to get back to you on that. I do have your email here. Sorry, I haven't gotten back to you yet, but I will get back to you this week. That you have my word on. So with that said, guys, thank you for your time today. Hope you got something out of today's show. Please leave a like down below. Hit that like button. Leave us a comment about what you thought of today's episode, and we'll be back next week. We're working on a new tip for this coming week, something quick and simple, and so our members will get that. We're going to be doing another members live stream in a couple of weeks before the end of the month, and we'll let you guys know when that happens as well. So until we see you guys next time, remember that
the first layer is always your foundation to a great print. Oh, you sniper.
All right, we'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Woohoo! What just